What is the worst thing that can happen to a hero? When you are at the absolute peak of fame, when the entire world loves you, what is the most valuable thing fate can take from you? The story we are telling today is not just about a crime. It is about the exact moment modern America lost its innocence forever. This is the story of a national hero transformed into a national tragedy. This is the story of the 1932 kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby, otherwise known as the crime of the century. It is not just the story of an empty crib. It is the story of a botched investigation, a ruthless media circus, and one of the most controversial trials in history. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the hero, Charles Lindbergh. He was not just a man, he was Lucky Lindy. He was the first pilot to fly solo, non-stop, across the vast Atlantic Ocean. He was America's greatest hero, a living symbol of technology, courage, and unstoppable will. He was wealthy, powerful, and untouchable. He had married the brilliant and beautiful Anne Morrow, and to escape the media frenzy that followed them everywhere, they built an isolated mansion in Hopewell, New Jersey, far from the eyes of the world. And then their first son was born, Charles Jr. To the American press, that baby was royalty. He was the nation's heir. March 1st, 1932. It was a cold, windy Tuesday night. The Lindbergh mansion was quiet. The baby had been put to bed at 8 p.m. in his crib, in his nursery, on the second floor of the house. At approximately 10 p.m., the baby's nurse, Betty Gow, went to check on him. The sight she discovered was the beginning of America's nightmare. The crib was empty. The window in the nursery was wide open, letting the cold New Jersey wind into the room. And just below the window, on the windowsill, was a muddy, white envelope. The ransom note. The baby was gone. The house exploded into panic. Charles Lindbergh grabbed his gun and searched the grounds. There was no one. The only thing they found, in the mud just below the window, was a broken, crudely made wooden ladder. The killer, or killers, had climbed up to the second-story window of America's most famous man, entered the nursery, taken the sleeping baby from his crib, and climbed back down. When the police arrived, this was not just a kidnapping. It was a national humiliation. Before we continue this unbelievably dark story, if you love unsolved historical mysteries and true crime analyses, hit that subscribe button right now, and let's find out how this case descended into chaos. The next morning, the news exploded. The world stopped. The Lindbergh case became the first true media circus in history. Hundreds of journalists and photographers invaded the small town of Hopewell. The investigation, meanwhile, was a catastrophe from the very first minute. The police were so inept, so overwhelmed by the fame of the victim, that they destroyed the crime scene. They allowed journalists and neighbors to walk through the nursery, contaminating hundreds of fingerprints and potential clues. The chain of custody was non-existent. And then, the ransom note was read. It was written in broken, poor English. It demanded $50,000 for the baby's return and warned them not to contact the police. But Charles Lindbergh didn't trust the police. He was a hero. He believed the rules did not apply to him. He decided to run the investigation himself, and in doing so, he made a terrible mistake. He asked the organized crime world for help. Lindbergh announced publicly that he would negotiate with the kidnappers, even using known underworld figures like Al Capone as intermediaries. This took the investigation away from law enforcement and turned it into a circus. Every con artist, every fraudster in America emerged, trying to get a piece of the Lindbergh fortune. But the strangest of them all was Jaffe, a retired, eccentric school principal named Dr. John Condon. using the pseudonym Jaffe, put an ad in the newspaper, offering to be the middleman for the ransom. Amazingly, the kidnappers answered him. This began the strangest part of the case. Months of secret letter exchanges, coded messages in the newspapers, and clandestine meetings in New York cemeteries. Jaffe, Condon met with a mysterious man with a German or Scandinavian accent, a man who called himself Cemetery John. Lindbergh was desperate. He agreed to pay. $50,000 was prepared, all in marked gold certificates, bills whose serial numbers were recorded. On that cold night, Lindbergh himself drove the money to a cemetery and handed the box over the wall to Cemetery John. The only thing he got in return was a promise. The baby was safe on a boat named Nellie off the coast of Massachusetts. It was a lie. The baby wasn't there. There was no boat, Nellie. The baby was nowhere. Lindbergh had been defrauded. And then, on May 12th, the horrifying discovery was made. Weeks after the ransom was paid, just a few miles from the Lindbergh mansion, a truck driver pulled over on the side of the road. In the woods, partially buried and badly decomposed, he found the body of a small child. It was Charles Lindbergh Jr. The autopsy revealed the most brutal part of the tragedy. The baby had been dead for weeks, perhaps even since the night of the kidnapping. Worse, he had a massive skull fracture. The kidnapper had, most likely, dropped the baby while climbing down the ladder, or when the ladder broke. The kidnapper had murdered the child, either accidentally or intentionally, in the very first minutes of the crime. All the negotiations, all the ransom, all the waiting, it was all for nothing. The child was already dead. The nation's grief turned to pure rage. The hunt was no longer for a kidnapper. It was for a murderer. But the trail went cold. Cemetery John vanished. The case stalled for 2 full years. The police had only one weapon left: the money. Those $50,000 in gold certificates were marked. The Treasury Department tracked the serial numbers of every single bill as they slowly, terrifyingly, began to appear in circulation around New York City. The police waited, patiently, tracking every dollar. The break came on September 15th, 1934, 2.5 years after the crime. One of the marked ransom bills, a $10 gold certificate, was used at a gas station. The attendant thought the bill was suspicious, as gold certificates were being recalled, and following instructions, he wrote down the license plate of the car. The plate was traced. It belonged to a German immigrant carpenter living in the Bronx. His name was Bruno Richard Hauptmann. The investigation, cold for years, suddenly ignited. Police descended on Hauptmann's home. Hauptmann tried to flee. He resisted arrest. When they searched his house, they found it, hidden in his garage, stuffed in the walls, wrapped in newspaper. $14,600 of the marked Lindbergh ransom money. The evidence was overwhelming, but it got worse. Investigators took wood from his attic. Forensic analysis proved that the wood from Hauptmann's attic floor perfectly matched the wood used to build the crude, homemade kidnapping ladder found at the crime scene. One of the rails of the ladder had been his attic floorboard. And then, handwriting experts matched Hauptmann's writing conclusively to the 14 bizarre ransom notes. The police had their man. This was Cemetery John. This brought the nation to the trial of the century in 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. This trial was the modern world's first taste of total media saturation. The small town was overrun. It was a circus. The prosecution's case was crushing. They presented the ladder, proving it came from his attic. They presented the money, found in his garage. They presented the handwriting. Then they brought in the star witnesses. Dr. Condon, Yejabe Chafsi took the stand, pointed directly at Hauptmann, and identified him as the man he met in the cemetery. Cemetery John. And then Charles Lindbergh himself took the stand. The hero, he testified, in a cold, clear voice, that he had been hiding nearby in the dark during that ransom exchange, and he recognized the voice that said, "Doctor, over here," and it was the voice of Bruno Richard Hauptmann. The defense was desperate. Hauptmann's story was weak, contradictory, and almost unbelievable. He claimed he was an innocent man. He claimed the money belonged to a friend and former business partner, a man named Isidore Fish. Hauptmann claimed Fish was the real killer. He said Fish had left the box of money with him for safekeeping before traveling back to Germany, where Fish had conveniently died, leaving Hauptmann with the stolen cash. He claimed the wood from his attic was stolen by Fish. He claimed the police had beaten him for days, forcing his handwriting to match the notes. Was he telling the truth? Or was he the most monstrous liar in history? This is the central mystery that divides people to this day. The evidence against him was massive. The ladder, the money, the handwriting, the eyewitness identification. But the investigation was also messy. The police were desperate for a conviction. The media circus demanded a sacrifice. Hauptmann, an illegal immigrant with a prior criminal record in Germany, was the perfect scapegoat. Was he guilty? Almost certainly. Was he guilty alone? This is the question that remains. The jury didn't spend long deliberating. The evidence was too much. The verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence: death by the electric chair. Bruno Richard Hauptmann maintained his innocence until the very end. He was offered a deal to save his life, commutation to a life sentence, if he would just confess. He refused. He was executed in 1936, taking his secrets or his innocence to the grave. The crime was solved, but the mystery only deepened. This brings us to the analysis. Why, after all these years, do we still question this case? Because the investigation was, from the beginning, a disaster. The police contamination of the nursery meant the true evidence was lost in the first hour. Lindbergh's decision to involve the mob turned the search into a free-for-all, allowing Cemetery John to operate with impunity. The evidence at the trial was strong, but it also felt too perfect. The ladder plank fitting exactly. Hauptmann, a carpenter, apparently building one of the worst ladders in history. This led to decades of conspiracy theories. The most popular theories insisted it had to be an inside job. How did the killer know the family was home that specific night? How did they know the exact location of the nursery? Some theories pointed to the servants. Some pointed, darkly, to Lindbergh's own sister-in-law, who had been in the house. The darkest theories even pointed to Lindbergh himself. Theories that he had accidentally killed the child, or that the child was disabled. And this was an elaborate cover-up. These theories have been almost entirely debunked, but they persist because the crime itself felt too personal. But the most likely truth is the simplest, and perhaps the saddest. The truth is that Bruno Hauptmann was likely a small-time criminal, operating with one or two others, who thought they could get rich by kidnapping the most famous child on Earth. They did not expect to kill the child. They panicked. The ladder broke. The baby was killed in the fall. The entire ransom negotiation, the letters, the Cemetery John persona, it was all a desperate attempt to get the money for a child that was already dead. The real tragedy of this story is not just the loss of the child. It is what the crime did to America's hero. Charles Lindbergh was never the same. The bright, smiling, lucky Lindy was gone. replaced by a bitter, dark, and suspicious man. The crime broke him. He and Anne fled America, disgusted by the media that had consumed their grief. He later embraced controversial, dark political beliefs that tarnished his legacy forever. The kidnapping didn't just kill the baby, it killed the hero. What does this crime of the century teach us today? It teaches us about the birth of media obsession. This was the first crime where the press was not just reporting the story, they were part of the story, interfering with the investigation, polluting the jury pool, and demanding a quick execution. It's a story about arrogance. Lindbergh's arrogance, believing he could bypass the police, and Hauptmann's arrogance, believing he could hide the marked money forever. But mostly, it is a human tragedy about a ladder, a muddy note, and an empty crib, and a mystery that even today still feels unsolved.